Hey everybody, welcome back to Tavern Talks. Tonight we have another wonderful guest. However, sadly, due to time zone issues, this is pre recorded just for everybody's awareness. Tonight we have an amazing opportunity to talk with people from not one, but two continents, which is even better, about a something that I'm extremely passionate about, which is mythology.
Me too.
Most of my games are very much designed by pulling folklore from all sorts of different worlds and kind of giving him a small twist and or spike. I'm curious to see what Avallen is because after listening to the Kickstarter alone, I'm already excited. But I have both of our writers here tonight, so if you two want to give us kind of who you are, your background, and a sneak peek of what this project is, and then we'll have a nice little conversation.
Sure. My name is Darren Osterk. I live in Cardiff in Wales. I'm the lead creator and director designer of Adderstone Games and Legends of Avallen. To introduce myself, I got into role-playing games through Baldur's Gate 2 when I was like 12 years old, 13 years old,
That's an old
and
game.
then didn't really play an actual TTRPG until university. So I was like age 24. And then I played it once and then immediately took over GMing. I was like, I'm a GM now. This is my life. Then went to Japan, where I met my now wife and met Kurt. And there we had a D&D campaign that ran for 2 years. And we quickly switched to Pathfinder instead. It was 3.5 at the time. And that was like the best gaming experience of my life. Like 2 years, we cried when it finished. And I've been trying to recapture that ever since. Like that's how I fell in love with everything. Came back to the UK to do a PhD. And at that time, I think fifth edition came out. And I don't want to throw too much shade at Wizard of the Coast. They do great work. But when it released, I was kind of like, oh, it's okay, but it's not doing what I want to do. I want to do my own thing. And so then I started making my own role-playing game that's very, very different from 5e. So we created Legends of Avallen, which is our Celtic tabletop role-playing game. It's a card-based system. You start from humble origins. You're just like a blacksmith or a shepherd, and then you go out into the world and then you learn how to use magic and stuff. And now we're making a Faceseeker's Guide to Avallen. This is a setting guide sourcebook, and to show you guys that we do still love 5e and D&D and things like that, the setting guide is compatible with our game and with 5e. Um, and this is a setting guide that will introduce you to Avallen if you haven't played there before, and if you have played there before, it expands the world of our Celtic Isles of Avallen. Yeah, so that's like a brief rundown. We can talk more about it later, but I think we should talk to Kurt now as well.
Yeah, sounds
Oh,
good.
sure. Yeah, and as Darren mentioned, we met in Japan. I'm not Japanese. I'm actually from California. And
Nice.
my start with role-playing games began, I think, on my eighth or ninth birthday when I went to Toys R Us and found one of the old, like, not the black box with the red dragon on it, but maybe it's that same game, but
Yeah, I know which one
condensed.
you. Yep.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, yeah. So I bought that, and I didn't know anyone personally who played D&D actively. I had some cousins who were much older than me who I saw with miniatures and so on, and that kind of maybe stuck in my memory. And so I just picked it up and learned to play it and taught my brothers and cousins how to play. And from then on, I was hooked. I played in conventions of the time, like OrcCon, StrategicCon, and I used
Hmm.
to go to conventions. So, being this little 9 or 10 year old playing with a bunch of 20 to 30 year olds
Yep.
playing role playing games. I wrote for the RPGA on occasion, like so
Oh,
that was when
nice.
I got stuck. But I stopped playing for many years after I went to university and helping my family with their family business, and picked up again basically when I started teaching. I started teaching in Japan, and I started using role playing games as a way to learn to play with the kids. And actually, I did some part of my research in the thesis I'm working on is about using role playing games to teach children what's called interactional competence in language. So I play what I call the dungeon game with kids, and that kind of reignited my love for role playing games. And then I also know Thank You Evil, but Mind Cook Games is also a game I used.
Oh yeah.
And then I met playing Magic the Gathering. So I played Magic the Gathering for many years as well. I have the distinction of being the number one player in California for 1 month due to some weird circumstances. That's my one claim to fame, I guess. And then yeah, Darren and I designed a casual magic set based on his D&D campaign.
Yeah,
actually.
yeah.
How we
Okay.
got our game design started, and then he moved to back to the UK. But when he started designing his game, we stayed connected and so on. And after he funded his first book, he asked me to come on because I'm a big nerd also, and and we get along. So yeah, we started writing together, and we've been collaborating on stuff ever since.
Yeah, it's our third book now. Oh.
Our third book, and we've also done a campaign. We also did a music tour for an artist from the UK named Xiao Zhou, and we did a Japan tour with Snoop Dogg's bassist and the drummer of Chai, and it was quite weird.
That's
It's been
awesome.
quite a fun ride. So yeah, that's
Sounds like
our
it.
that's our little spiel, and now we're here talking about a Face Seeker's Guide to Avallen, and we're
Yeah.
excited to talk with you about all things nerdy, geeky, etc.
Oh, definitely. And we're going to get to that, I guarantee you, because that seems to be where this immediately goes to. Is like, what is the deepest we can go first? And then for some reason we wheel it back as that happens. Um, but you've answered a couple questions that I ask all of my guests when they first walk into the tavern. The one, of course, is how did you get into TTRPGs, which you both answered very easily. The second question, though, that I like to ask people is, what got you into it? What was the catcher? What was the spark in your head that went, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to play. And why? Because those are the two main questions that a lot of our guests are looking for. Because they're like, okay, I have friends that might want to play, or I have family that might be interested. How do I engage them? How do I get them involved?
I think for me, it really was being a game master is what got me hooked. Because as a kid, I really wanted to become a game designer. Like I
Hmm.
just was making lots of games inside my head when I was younger, and I had just for some reason didn't pursue coding or software or anything like that. And then once I started GMing, I was like, well, I had all these game ideas, and I get to use these rule systems to make games with people. So I just make things that I want to play and make other people play it. It's what I do. So and that's really like dovetailed well into being an actual now game designer. I still just make things that I would want to play and uh, other people would like to play it. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what really hooked me.
How about you, Kurt?
I think there's a really strong social component for me. Obviously, I
Okay.
grew up with video games and so on, but I think I grew up with two brothers and a sister, and back then, because I'm a bit older, when you played, you had one controller for Final Fantasy VII, whatever, right?
Mm.
And so yeah, and obviously I love video games, but you're always fighting for control of the
Control of
console.
the game.
Literally.
Yeah, but the cool thing is like when I became a game master and I started playing, I could play with both my brothers and my sister when she was old enough, and we can just start creating stories and games based on stuff that we loved and being characters and all the stuff that we're interested in. And I think that holds true today too, right? Like where even aside from role playing games, I played a lot of board games with my family and I played Magic with a lot of my cousins and friends and so on. And there's always the social component where you can spend time together, but you don't necessarily have to like be staring at the TV or you don't have to be fighting over control of a thing. You're
Right.
creating it together. And that's the thing that I've always loved where you're collaborating constantly in that conversation, but it's very active. You're not just drinking and just like taking turns, about your individual
Right.
experience, creating something together. And that's always fucking awesome. That's to me the best part about RPGs,
Mm.
TTRPGs. You're actively creating this story that only exists because you guys are there doing it together, and it's in the best cases it's rarely selfish, it's always giving, and you're trying to give each other space to make something that's great for everybody. So that's what I'm about. I love that shit.
No, I love it. That's great. It's funny that you mentioned this because this is something that I had to experiment with this year. And we're currently in the experimentation phase with a bunch of my friends because I've got like 9 or 10 of us that like to play all the time. But not 9 or 10 of us can show up every week or every other week, right? So now we've got what we call Dream with Friends, which is all of these people having their own little stories going on. So,
Mhm.
and most of it is very collaborative because I don't have time to sit there and remember all worlds for 12 different stories. Like, I just don't. So I picked up the book and I've been really hard on this for the last couple of months with the Game Master's Guide to Proactive Roleplay. And it really showed me a way to do it. So I'll ask my players a lot more questions than I used to and build the world right in front of them with them. And once we get kind of a framework down, then I can kind of pull encounters that I think would work well here, or items that might show up here, things like that. But like last night, we created 3 locations in a town that wasn't started when we first started playing, 3 NPCs, and 3 goals for one goal for each of the players. And now it was like, which goal are we running for this week? But the downfall is that those 3 players might not show up next time. So then I'm writing a whole new dream for a whole new 3 people next time. But I have this documents now that say, okay, this is the story that we kept with these 3 people. This is the story we get these 3 people, and then it's kind of, we'll see how it goes from there. So yeah,
very cool, very cool.
but I like your thought process with the social aspects of it.
Similarly, but Darren, like Darren's campaign, because I didn't play in it. Like I said, we met, I think.
Oh
towards
yeah,
the
true.
end. But what's interesting about his campaign is similarly, his had how many players did you have? Like 6 or 7 people?
There
Was it-
were
So-
5 of us, and the
5.
shtick was that I started GMing it, and like I said, I like giving people gaming experiences. So the first thing I wanted people to play was Diablo 2. So I made Tristram and all that kind of. But it wasn't actually Tristram. It was just kind of inspired by it. They had no idea.
Yeah.
But then, because I like GMing so much, and they were all new players, I wanted them to experience GMing as well. So, like, once I finished my adventure hook, I then passed it on to another player, and they then GM'd for another part of that same world, and then we kind of went round in a loop. And then once it came back to me, I then like reunited like all of the quest lines that we'd done together into some kind of like bigger story goal.
Oh, that's
what
awesome.
made it so satisfying. It was super satisfying for that reason. So it's kind of scary handing off the reins of your world to the other players to be their own GMs, but everyone did such a great job.
Yeah.
So that was why it's so profound experience.
So
Yeah.
Oh, go.
No, you go ahead. You go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say. So I'm looking at your stuff right now, and the one thing that really is catching my eye that I didn't notice at first was the fact that not only is this a dice-based game, but it's a card-based game. So how did you get the cards involved?
So yeah, Legends of Avallen is a purely card-based game. There's no dice at all. And we got there through playtesting. I was so Legends of Avallen came out like 4 years ago now, and I was playtesting I guess 6 years ago. And it was really important to me. The core part of the game system is that I want to encourage creative teamwork. I want the players to work together using their imaginations inside the world and be rewarded for it, so they're encouraged to do it over and over and over again. And like coming from D&D, for example, a big issue I have with the way D&D plays out is you can only gain advantage once, which means there's no reason to help each other any more than one time. Like if Kurt helps me, it was no point, James, you helping me, because you can't get double advantage, can you?
Right.
So why bother? You should go do your own thing. And so in our game, you get as many advantages as you can create by using the environment or using your allies. And when we were playtesting, we ended up rolling lots and lots of dice. And we're like, this isn't sustainable, because which dice have you not rolled yet? And who's storing what advantages for what kind of thing? And then a playtest suggested, well, why don't you use cards? Because then you can deal out the cards. You know the ones that are face down haven't been rolled yet. And it makes it just a lot more easy and manageable. And I said no, because role-playing games don't use cards. No one will buy my game if I don't use dice. But then we tried it, and bloody hell, it worked, didn't it? It only bloody worked. And so then we kind of just had to stick with it, because that's what the game wanted, you know? So that's how we ended up there, yeah.
That's awesome. So can you play with a normal deck of cards, or do you have to have involved dice? Involved cards. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. There was a Western game that I played while I was deployed in the desert that was based on cards as well, and that was a lot of fun.
That Deadlands, were you playing?
Deadlands, yeah.
No, this one wasn't Deadlands.
Oh, shoot.
Okay.
That's a Western game that has cards, yeah.
Deadlands is fun because they base it around poker, which is different from what we're doing.
Yeah.
I've
And
always
this one might as well be. I think this was also based around poker as well, I think it was based around blackjack.
I see. Oh, that's
So
fun.
yeah, but it was all based on the Western theory of. So I guess it goes with the
Western theme.
the civilization at the time and the culture there. So cards was a big thing back then, and it was just an interesting way to play. But yeah, no, That's interesting that you can know as well now in a fantasy world use the same exact thing to build your own set. Now, does each person get a full deck? Is
It doesn't
everybody?
actually matter.
Oh,
So
okay.
the deck gets reshuffled whenever a Joker is revealed. So we keep the Jokers in the deck,
Mm,
and then yeah, it doesn't really matter if everyone has the same cards or not. Yeah.
nice. I
Mhm.
like that.
And I think one of the things that Darren mentioned with getting multiple advantages and people helping you, that's a huge part of the system. Like when you're encountering hitting encounters, the main thing you want to do is try to again collaborate and try to get people to help you narratively that will give you further advantages, which is why you need so many more advantages. And so a lot of
Hmm.
times when you're fighting a monster, for example, your goal for the monster isn't that he has 100 hit points and everyone's trying to nug him for 2 hit points, 10 hit points. The goal is
Right.
that you have actually a very few levels where you're trying to overcome his hide and take him down. And so there's really only a few successes you need to make, but in order to overcome that barrier, you have to really work together and to defeat that creature. So it's narratively really satisfying in that sense because everything that you do clearly helps you overcome the obstacle.
Yeah, exactly. So like it's for some mechanics, it's actually necessary that you get a critical success. And to get a critical success, you need to work together. And so if you all work separately and got a success, it wouldn't be good. 5 successes doesn't equal one crit. So you would fail.
Ah,
So you
you'd
have to get the
automatically
crit,
fail.
which means you
Yeah.
have to work together. The gameplay enforces it. It says, no, you must figure this out together. It's like a puzzle. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's very satisfying.
No, that is really cool. And it definitely brings that mentality of collaboration, which, is something that I make fun of a lot of times because people complain that, it's a very anti. I was like, this is the most social, antisocial game you'll ever play. Because I might not like people in general, but the 6 players at my table I love. Like, that's how this works.
Yeah.
And vice versa. And I think that's funny to say that because you can't play one player. You can, it's very different, very difficult.
And
Um,
different play experience. Some people do it well, but
very, very different play experience. And I think for a game like this, it's even more difficult to play with one player as one player because of the fact that you would need these critical successes and you would need these collaborative opportunities to tell a proper narrative within your world. So, what then sparked Avallen? So we've got the game mechanics. Now,
Yeah.
where did the story come from?
So the story is an interesting story. Uh, I live in Cardiff. I live in Wales, and
Ellis, just gonna
there
throw that
is a
out there.
lot of Welsh language about um, all the signs here are written in English and in Welsh.
Mm,
So
which
just by being here, you're exposed to the fact that yes, there's another language here that's older than English, that's been here long before the English have, and it kind of exposes you to like learning about the culture. But it still didn't occur to me to make a Celtic role-playing game. It was oh, I'm gonna get really embarrassed now. Kurt, I met a magic artist,
yes,
an artist from Magic the Gathering.
yes.
He did Recurring Nightmare and Show and Tell.
Was it Dan? Oh yeah, that was yeah, damn it. Now wait, recurring.
Recurring Nightmare and Show and Tell. Anyway, it's an artist I met at MagicCon in London, and we just hang out for a moment. And I told him we're going to Chicago, which is where he lives. And he said, "Oh, you should meet me in a cafe there. We should hang out sometime." I was like, "I don't know why he said that. It's very kind of him. We didn't really know each other." But I had to be going to Chicago, so we went and we met up. And I told him then because he had a lot of experience with fantasy arts and illustrations,
okay.
and he'd also done illustrations for role-playing games as well. And so I told him about my project, and I said I'm not sure about what kind of world to set it in yet and what to
And you
do.
said to Jeff Laubenstein.
Yes, Jeff Laubenstein. Yeah, shout out Jeff Laubenstein. Yeah,
To Jeff Laubenstein.
yeah. So we met Jeff Laubenstein, and he said, "Well, you should do what you know and what you're experienced with." I was like, "Ah, that makes sense. I don't know why I didn't think of that before." And so then it was like, "Well, Japan, because we lived in Japan, or Cardiff, because we lived in Cardiff." And I know that Japan would probably go well because Japanese culture is very popular around the world. But I looked around and I saw no one was doing anything Celtic. Everything is Nordic. There's loads of Nordic stuff going on in the role-playing game world. But at the time, no one was doing Celtic. And I thought, well, that's strange. there's an interesting culture here. There's an interesting history here. There's the Roman invasion of Britain, right? It's a literal clash of cultures happening between a culture that we're more familiar with, the Roman culture, and this older culture of the Celts. And obviously, Celtic kind of lost in a way, like the culture and language got pushed to the peripheries of the British Isles. Um, and so that's just like a fascinating period of history. They have their own religions, their own mythos that no one really knows about. I was like, well, if I make something here, I could, expose more people to it. I could, like, sorry, my alarm's going on. And so then I started reading about it, and then I kind of got enamored with it and got obsessed. And I was like, well, yeah. So that's where Avallen came from.
That's awesome.
The name Avallen is an old Welsh name for Avalon.
Oh, okay.
And it comes from Avall Innis, or Innis Avall, which means the Isle of Apples. It's like this holy place where fruits only grow, and you can go there and be healed and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
That's awesome. And I'm completely jealous that you live in a place like that. Like my best friend, one of my good friends from TTRPGs we've been talking for years now since I started this show. He lives in Scotland, and he just this year became a professional writer as his main job. So he's sending me pictures and videos of walking around the Shetlands or the Highlands, and I'm like I'm over here in the U.S. where the oldest thing we have is the colonial age. So I mean, there's that. Or unless we go deep, I will say Native American culture is pretty interesting, and some of their mythos and stuff like that. So that can be a fun one to twist around into a puzzle or two. But
Sure.
Celtic.
Okay, you want to jump in there? I saw something on your lips there.
No, yeah, I was just here. Yeah, I imagine that the countryside around you, where you live on the East Coast, is pretty beautiful as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, if you get past the city area, yeah, the countryside's pretty nice. The mountains are pretty nice.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of the reality is the whole world is old. It's equally old everywhere. So maybe the cultures aren't, but the trees and the mountains and stuff, and I think that'll be as beautiful in your area as anywhere in the world. But it is wild. I visited Wales for Darren's wedding. I DJ'd it actually, which was fun because I'd never DJ'd before, and you feel at first, because I taught English here for many years to Japanese kids and high school students, and I finally understood what it was like to not understand English, because you see everything in English letters and you think you might know the words, but it's just like gibberish. So in some places, and it's wild. It was a very cool experience. I recommend everyone to go to Wales to disassociate from language for a little bit, because it's a very interesting experience as an English speaker.
Yeah, I lived in South Korea for a year for the military, and
nice.
Very similar, where you see everything in English and then everything in South Korean and then everything in Japanese. And there's like 4 or 5 different languages they stack you on, and you're like, okay, got it. I know my language, and that's all I really know, but the other ones I can't pick out. And part of it is interesting because the way they write, because normally it's written like this on billboards and stuff like that, but then they have to actually, a lot of the billboards, because of the way the size of the words are for English, they're still turned sideways, and they read this way but down, and it's just an interesting look in the culture shift. I'm curious, so you've lived in Wales for a bit of time.
Yeah.
When I was in South Korea, it was interesting to watch how modern and history were kind of blended together. So like you could go to a city, and then in the middle of the city there's an actual temple, and it's as if nothing has been touched in that little pocket of the city. Yeah. Is that similar in Wales, or?
So I mean, just in the UK general, there's like lots of old stuff all over the place, right? But the Welsh Celticness, we're talking 1,500 years ago. But yes, the answer is yes. You can go on hikes, and in fact, you're like, there's a town just like 25-minute drive from me, and in the middle of it there's a Roman amphitheater. And it's huge, and it's gorgeous, and it's amazing. It's covered in grass. It looks so cool, and it's so beautiful. And just like a straight shot, like a 5-minute walk from there, there's where all the Roman barracks were. There's all the stone brickwork from all these buildings. Like, it's a huge area just covered in rectangular, because you can walk through the corridors of these old barracks there. They also have the swimming pool. They had a swimming pool there, like a lapped Olympic-sized pool.
Oh, like
for the
a
soldiers.
bathhouse,
Yeah, that's
or
still
like
there
a
as
bath.
well.
Yeah.
And then if you go 20 minutes the other direction, you'll find like Neolithic, Stone Age, Bronze Age
Oh.
stone monuments, like burial tombs, like
Hmm.
huge stone slabs stacked on top of each other. You can walk inside it, and it's just in some farmer's back garden. And you just take a public pathway and go there. They're not even on the map. Um, and yeah, they're just there's just stone works all over everywhere. You have to like find like these old websites to find the locations, get the geolocation to go out and get them because they're just not really marked, but they're everywhere. So yeah, it
That's
is
awesome.
kind of just out and about. Yeah.
It's
For
weird to
reference
walk
too,
that. For what that?
that wedding I mentioned, Darren got married in a castle, a stone castle, and it was amazing. It was the most amazing
It has
experiences ever.
two moats.
Had two moats,
Two moats.
and
Yeah.
it was an ancient castle that we played a bunch of '70s disco hits in,
In fact,
and
shout out. You can, if you go onto our Kickstarter page and watch the video preview,
that's right.
at the end of the video, there's me talking about the project. And in that video, I'm at that castle, Caerphilly
Oh,
Castle. You can
okay.
see a shot of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, like I said, I checked the video out
Yeah.
earlier today just to kind of get a glimpse of this idea. Um, the artwork is gorgeous,
Yeah, thank you.
and the the style is much different than you see in normal. Um, I would say normal like Eastern European culture that was what kind of is pulled from for most Dungeons and Dragons books. Um, this idea that the high fantasy has kind of gained that pocket of the world. It seems to be the most portion of it. Um, what though in the Celtic mythology and culture did you see was the thing that caught your eye to say, okay, this is what I want to write about?
Oh, it was the other world, for
Okay.
sure. Just like the other world is like the spiritual location. It's
Hmm.
not like a heaven, or any kind of, it can be like a heaven, like a paradisial place, but it could also be like a hell. It could also be something chaotic and weird and strange. But most interestingly, the Celtic underworld, otherworld is somewhere that you can stumble into while that you're alive. You could be an adventurer going through the forest and you'll find yourself in the other world. And everything's
Mm.
weird and strange. You'll be meeting the Fae and these crazy creatures, and you'll have an adventure, and you come out again. And just it being a location of wonder that you can go to from anywhere just made me realize, oh, that's just fantastic for game masters. Like inside the other world, the game master can do whatever they want. You can manipulate time, you can manipulate space, you can change the way things work, change the way magic works. You can do whatever you want. It's a realm of chaos and
Right.
wonder. You can tell all sorts of stories there, and the players can go there whenever you want them to within reason. And so just that kind of creative freedom, just always being a part of the world, just got me really, really excited. Now, I actually, in the end, tend to not use the other world that often. I still want it to be strange and whimsical, so I don't really want the
Hmm.
players going there all the time. But I want them to know that when they do go there, things will be weird. And so yeah, it's definitely that. And again, like all the cultic legends and stories usually involve the other world, and it is always strange and weird and wonderful. So yeah, it was that completely. Just
Yeah, like princes and like humans, human kings and prince kings, fairy kings, trading places for a year. When they come back, 80 years have passed and stuff like
I
that,
got you. Right.
or they get ahead of their king and then they take a stop and they're talking for 2 weeks, and yeah, a century has passed and everything's weird and they bury their head in a hill. The stories are very strange and fun and weird, and yeah, we do draw on that. I think when we think about that stuff a lot every time we're coming up with
yeah, like
stories
how
or
can we make it weirder? Because like when you read these old Celtic tales, a lot of times sometimes things just don't quite make sense. Things just happen and they're a bit strange. Like in one
yeah.
of them, they get on a giant salmon. There's a giant salmon,
Hmm.
and they get on the back of the giant salmon. It races down the river and takes them where they need to go. And it's like, well, where did this giant salmon come from? How do they know they can ride it? Well, it doesn't matter. It's very, very cool and it's
Right.
wonderful. So we'll include things like that. Yeah.
That's awesome. And I think a lot of it, a lot of people wonder like where these big stories come from. And I think it's just the difference between being passed down by generation, but also on top of it, nobody understood how to explain things back then. So everything was mystical, everything was magic, everything was a uniqueness that we now have science, so it makes it a little harder to do. Um, I think that's similar to like Greek gods and things like that. You look at how Greek gods are created; it's all those things that people couldn't explain directly. So they said, "Oh, well, the god did it," and whatnot, and whatnot. Now, digging through this setting and digging through Welsh culture and Celtic mythology, what is one event that you really, really enjoyed reading about
You. Okay, I got something.
or
Would you
writing
go first,
about?
Scott?
I guess would be the other option.
Writing
Oh,
about.
let me think about mine, but you can go first, Darren,
Okay.
if you have.
Uh, I mean, I have so many, but the first one that comes to mind is in the Irish Celtic mythology and folklore. They and in the British as well, in some parts as well. There's this idea that the people came and there were giants here before the people, and the people defeated the giants and sent them into the other world, and then the people conquered the land, and that's how
Mm,
people came to inhabit these isles, right? And
the strangers.
I felt and the people that did it were kind of like became gods and like demigods in the histories and the legends. And when I read that, I just thought, well, that just sounds like it's very similar to Zeus and the Greek gods defeating the Titans before them, the
Hmm.
primordial Titans, and then they became gods that kind of added order to the world. And just seeing like parallels between different mythologies kind of got me excited because I like patterns. And
Yep.
so I've kind of taken that and put it into the world where there's gods all over the place in our world. The world is bigger than Avallen, right? Obviously, there's the Raxian Empire, which is our equivalent of the Romans. And in the Valak region of the world, the gods, the people defeated the Fiaithra, which is what we call the Titans, the Celtic Titans, before people could inhabit the lands. And the people that defeated them became gods, and they shepherded the lands. Um, and the same thing happened to the Raxians. There were Titans that were there, and their people defeated them. They became gods. And then what happened to the gods later on is different, but there's the same story that's happening in different places. And how the gods then behave after defeating these things is what kind of determines what's difference between their cultures and their religions and that kind of thing. So kind of went around the rank there, but I just like seeing patterns in different mythologies and religions, and then translating that into the game and writing our own stories around it. So yeah, that's what I love. Yeah.
Nice. What about you, Kurt?
There's a story during research that I came across in the Mabinogi, which if you read the Mabinogi, and you'll see this. It's called the Dream of Ranabi. Here's the thing about me too. I say all the names incorrectly. It drives Darren crazy, but that's just how I am. But I think it's the Dream of Ranabi. And it's a Middle Welsh. It was a Middle Welsh poem that's associated with the Mabinogion, which is the one of the oldest collections of stories of Welsh legends, and which includes King Arthur. Legends of King Arthur is included in that, and which inspired the later sort of uh, middle-age romantic version of King Arthur. But what's really interesting about the story is that it has like this framing device around it where you have these guys that come in and they're like kind of poor, and one of the guys falls asleep and he wakes up in Arthurian times, which is already kind of like old for them. And he enters this kind of weird abstract story where King Arthur is playing a Celtic board game, Gudabil. How do you say it, Dave? Do you know how to say it?
Yeah, Gwydabich.
Gudabil. Thank you,
Yeah.
Gudabil. And he's trying to get their attention, and they're playing, and there's like an army on its way, and they're kind of in stalemate, and Arthur like crushes the pieces into dust and declares peace, and then the narrator wakes up and he realizes he slept for 3 days. So it was just a dream kind of thing. And what's interesting about that is how literary it is and abstract it is for a story, such an ancient story. Like you have this framing device, and then you have the thing that happens with older legends of Arthur and so on, and things that are referential, but you're not sure what they mean. It's almost like a what's the guy who did like Twin Peaks or one of these like postmodern these kind of weird directors. But it's an old Welsh tale. It's very strange in that way, but it's also sophisticated, and it reminds me of stories that came much later, like Connecticut Yankee and Mark Twain's Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court, right?
Mm.
Uh, or these stories about people who hit their head and they get transported to the past. And so, even though it's one of the oldest tales that we know, and that has survived and been translated and only exists in one book, it speaks to something about storytelling that's universal to us, which is when we tell stories, we're interested not only in telling stories about ourselves, but in imagining ourselves in the past. It's if you think about it, it's like a role playing game in a way, right? Like a guy like has an imagination about something that happened with King
Right.
Arthur and in
Yeah.
fantasy. And that shit's so cool that this story from the 1800s is telling us about the 1100s, which comes from even older stories that only exist in one book. This is something we're connected to for centuries, and that fucking blew my mind when I read that.
I love
Sorry, I
that.
get it. Yeah,
No,
yeah.
no, that's why we do this, right? Like this isn't just something we do because it's fun or it's something that, excites us a little bit. No, these are things we're passionate about and we get extremely excited about. And watching people create their own versions of these things doesn't just, and it's weird to say this, but at the same time it's pushing the culture further. As we get more technologically advanced and more to the point where everything's blending together, we're losing a lot of those unique cultures that are kind of going to the wayside. And things like storytelling and things like role playing games are bringing them back. We don't get that opportunity, and there's a lot of cultures nowadays that are going back to their roots to pull these stories from. Um, the what is it? The Shattered Citadel, which was actually a like partially Wizards of the Coast published book, but it was the first one that was actually diving into African culture, and it was much different, shaped in many different ways than what we're used to. So, one thing I like is creatures, characters, things that are, as you would say, strange and weird. What is a creature, mythological animal, mythological person that you have explored in the Celtic religion or the Celtic mythology or culture that has inspired you to create something in this book?
There's so many,
Oh,
dude.
I'm sure.
It's
Yeah. What's one
There's
that
a
maybe not many people have heard of?
also all of them. Man, they're so wonderful.
like go,
There's
go first. Good. I mean, I know what I'm going to talk about if you don't talk about it.
okay, then you go first then, because I've got to pass it down in my own mind first. So go
Yeah,
before.
so probably one of the mascots of Avallen is the Bubak.
Yeah,
Bubak.
And it's how do we spell it in our book? There's different spellings of it throughout time,
yeah,
but
it's BWBACH. Ubach.
and it's basically the Welsh version of a brownie, like a pixie, right? And we
Yeah,
depict it in our book as like this kind of small, furry, like strange furry fae.
that
And
winged
you'll see in a
creature.
lot
Yeah.
of art, yeah, and you'll see in the trailer there's like a art of a Morgan, which is like a mermaid-like creature, and a guy passed out, and next to him are like two little furry creatures. Those are boobucks, and boobucks are fun because they're what we think of as like the sort of like neutral tricksy fae. Like
Hmm.
historically, they would help you with your chores, and you put out milk for them because they can't easily get milk in the other world for Unwin for whatever reason, and they take it and they make their own like fairy foods out of milk. But one of my favorite, so one, they're a main fae in our world, um, but in the mythology and the literature, they're often described, I think originally in British Goblins, which is a 19th century treatise on like different uh, uh, Celtic or British fairies. Um, and they say that they really dislike teetotalers, which are people who abstain from alcohol, and ministers. And there's stories of like these guys playing pranks on people who take themselves too seriously or abstain from basically having fun. So it's like this weird thing where they believe in the Christian religion, but it's conflicting with the modern age of it's the modern age of current actual Christian mythology conflicts in a lot of these stories with the older traditions of Celtic and Fey beliefs, which kind of happens in our world too with the influx of the Raxians, our stand-ins for the Romans, where you have this invading religion or culture contesting with the native culture, and there's tension there, and that's present in the literature as well. So I love boobox. They're cute, they're
Bullbox.
fun, they're quickly, and they're a lot of fun to play with. How about you, Darren?
All right, yeah, I got my answer. I'm going with the Flamigin.
Mm.
The Flamigin is also known as a water leaper. It is a Welsh folklore tale. It is a toad-like creature. It looks like a toad, but it doesn't have legs. Instead of front legs, it has bat wings. And instead of back legs, it has a really long tail with a huge stinger on it. And it lurks in the water, it leaps out of its wings, and it impales you through the chest and kills you.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
It's fucked up.
that's yep. I'm done.
No,
Think I
wait,
don't
I
have a
take it
choice.
back. I have another one. No, I lied.
The Spriggan? Is it Spriggan?
No, the Muckalevy, dude.
Oh, Mukalevy, yeah.
Yeah.
Mukalevy.
Oh god, this thing's awful. It's from the Northern Isles on Scotland. It might have been inspired by Nordic inspirations of a creature called a Nukkalavi or Nukkalevi, but it is the most horrible thing, dude. It's a flayed man fused to the back of a horse. He's got no legs, but he's on the horse. It's not like a centaur. There is a horse. The horse has no skin as well.
Right.
He's on the back of the horse riding it. He's got no legs. He's got really long, elongated arms that can reach the ground. And he scoops up people and feeds them to the horse, and it like extracts their souls. It's like this plague bringer that walks out of the ocean, comes out of the sea onto land, wreaks plagues everywhere, and then goes back into the sea again. It is horrible. And it's like, that's so cool. That's so metal. It's awesome.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
And no one knows about it. And it's
No.
like, no one knows about this crap, but it's so cool. So put it in the book. Everyone's got to
There
know.
you go. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So that's cool.
Yeah.
I like the idea that you have both, right? Like you have the idea of this very playful fey creature that you talked about, the Bubach, but then you also have these two other creatures that I can't pronounce off the top of my head at the moment, that are horrific, right? Like, and these are these are the boogeyman stories, right? Like these are the ones that they'll tell the kids, don't go out at night, or this thing's gonna eat you, like things like that. But yeah, it's so cool because you go down the cultural rabbit hole and you start looking at other cultures. They all have something that represent these things, but it's a little different. It's a little changed. The demeanor's a little different depending on where they're at and whatnot. But like you said, patterns are a thing in many cultures, which is really
Yeah, you're right. Like, okay, so to capitalize exactly what you just said, like the three things we brought up, the Bubak, the Flanagan, and the Nukkalevi. The Bubak, like you said, is a playful tale creature that's used probably to inspire kids and fairy tales, that kind of thing. The Nukkalevi is like the evil incarnate, right? It's the boogeyman, like you said. And the Flanagan, we're pretty sure that's just a tale that fishermen would tell each other, so they have an excuse as to why they didn't catch fish that day, right? If you're down at the pub, they talk to the wives like, yeah, it was a really bad day today. There was a flanagan, we heard it croaking in the corner. You know, it's just like a
and we
thing
got out of
that's
there.
about, and it just ruins your day. You know?
Yeah. And I'm sure there are many, many other monsters and creatures and lore just poured through this book, these books. Like one of my biggest habits is, you know, I love lore, I love settings. Man, if I can find a monster book, that's like my new game, because I'll flip through that sucker for days and days and days, coming up with like, okay, how do I make this into its world? Where does this fit? Where does this connect to? Because as a game master who's been game mastering for over 20 years now, the same monsters aren't as fun because people have played them over and over and over again, and they know what they're looking for. And metagaming is not something that we try to do, but it's inherent at times. Things like you can't just surprise somebody with a troll anymore and expect them not to be like, I'm going to burn it so it doesn't regenerate. Like, well, crap, now I've got a troll that I have to come up with something unique. Where we can use these fairy tales and these stories, kind of change them around a little bit, because now instead of me sending a troll at them, I'm going to send that nasty toad thing at them, and they're going to different feel, right? Or like you said, that the skinless person, the flayed person, and the consumption, kind of similar to a Bodak from second edition, where it's just this gaping maw of covered in pretty much like fur, or like a like almost like a burlap sack, and he just walked around. And if you looked in the maw of of his mouth, your soul would be sucked in. Um, and I know that comes from another lore somewhere, but that's what I'm saying is like you can change those creatures, and now you have something completely different. It's completely unique for your players. So
100%. Yeah, yeah. And I that's definitely the intent of the book is to both provide something new because even though it's its own world, it is compatible with fifth edition. And the idea is this island, you could either play in it natively, or if you're playing a different campaign, you could kind of drop it in and it's on the periphery of whatever continent you're playing on, right? Hypothetically. And or if the world already has existing like Celtic traditions, Moonshade Isles in the Forgotten Realms kind of comes to mind. You could
mm-hmm.
also take that were from this book and use them in your world and make it new again. So we're trying to look at the old for inspiration and renew it. And I think bringing new things back into the hobby, which we know about, but aren't as depicted as readily as a lot of other monsters and creatures are. The one that comes to mind is the Spriggan, which we all know the name of. But when we were doing research for this, we were looking for Spriggan art, and there's very little Spriggan art. Like,
That's like at least accurate to what the folkloric tales were, right?
Right,
yeah,
you're
yeah.
looking at you type Spriggan, and you're either getting something from science fiction or you're getting something from Magic the Gathering, neither of which are
Yeah.
actually what the
Yeah,
Spriggan is.
yeah.
Yeah.
Magic has some good ones. They do have the big headed thing. Like there's a couple good Spriggans. But the one we referenced was like a statue, right? Like from
Mhm.
Wikipedia, like the Spriggan art we referenced. So I think that's the other thing we're looking forward to too is, and we are doing, which is creating new depictions of these little depicted monsters and creatures. So
Well, at this point in our show, normally we would have our audience asking questions and you all answering as we kind of go to this point. So instead, I'm going to ask a couple questions, and hopefully this will at least give us some final, really good things to end this with. And the first one is there a type of culture or mythology that you want to touch next?
Yeah, there's a bunch, and we I really want to focus on pre-medieval Iron Age folklore.
Mm-hmm.
That's my jam at the moment. Um, we were looking at North Africa, the Eurasian steppes, the Philippines, and Japan, and I actually put it to my community. And the Eurasian steppe and North Africa are the ones that came out on top. So we're not settled yet, but yes, the answer is yes.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And that'll be fun because then you can literally just increase where Avallen is and kind of push
Yeah.
it down even more into more. The idea of the other world is really cool to me because, like you said, you could be literally walking down the street and all of a sudden something has changed dramatically. And you're like, okay, what happened?
Yeah, yeah.
And that's exciting. I'm curious. The Kickstarter seems to be going very well. Are you excited about the ending for this, or is this something that you guys will be striving for differently going forward? Are you going to continue to produce for 5e, or are you going to move strict to your own system soon?
Oh, talk about the future. That's difficult, my dudes. I don't know. We got to get through this book first. I think that we have lots of projects. We have too many fingers and too many pies. We have a lot of ideas of other projects we want to do. Some of it's out of role-playing games as well, board games as well. We're working on some other RPG projects that aren't Avallen related that we can't talk about yet that we're very excited about. Too many ideas, not enough time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is this your guys' full-time job right now?
It has been mine for the past 4 years.
That's awesome.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's
I do. It is my main occupation, but because I still have some part-time things here since I usually work in the morning. Actually, I'm going to go to a consultation gig that I'm doing for a school right after this. And then in the evening when Darren wakes up, then we start talking and we start our work day kind of thing.
That's awesome.
Usually in my evening.
Hey, I mean, whatever works, and it seems to be working well. Like I said, this is the third book now, and it seems to be catching on. The lore is definitely engaging. The artwork is gorgeous. I noticed. I want to just give a shout out that you don't use AI art. You don't use, and you prefer not to, which right now with it being such a heavy topic, and
Yeah,
so many artists out there that are having struggles, that's
yeah.
respectful. And
We got lucky in a way because when I first made Avallen, the first book, AI art wasn't really a thing yet, and I had a really strong vision on what I wanted the art style of the book to be.
right,
Um, and it's like this painterly look. I didn't want anything to be like high fidelity. I wanted it to look l like it was from a story. It's like not quite clear, you know, it
mm-hmm.
could go either
Yeah,
way.
very
And also it
painted.
looks human as well. Like you can tell that someone has painted their brushstroke or so you can see that this is made by a person. It's artistry, right? That's
Hmm.
what I wanted from the look. And I feel like I did a good job making it consistent. And we did that with all the books going forward. And then once the AI stuff came out, it turns out that the AI is really good at doing the high fidelity stuff. And so I just got lucky really in a way that just like
Right,
our art style now kind of sticks out and it's clearly not AI. It has this you can tell where the person's drawn their brush across things. And so you know it's human.
yeah.
You can see the pencil marks. So
No, and
um
that's I think that's the biggest thing, right? Is it gives off that full feel that this is still
yeah.
traditional artwork.
Oh,
Um,
and we produce art books as well. Like when I started making the book and I was sending artworks out to these things, I was getting their sketches back. I was like, these sketches are so good. And it's so interesting to see my conversation between myself and the artist about try these things, and how it ends up being a final illustration, right? And I thought, well, other people should be able to see this as well because it's fun and interesting. So we started making art books. And so all our books have an art book that goes with it that shows you where everything comes from. Like all
right.
our ideas as designers as well. We talk about the Celtic legends, where these stories come from.
Mhm.
Like this creature's inspired by this story, this quest is inspired by this story. Um, and then you also see all the concept art as well, and where everything came from. So you can see all the human artistry that goes behind everything in our art books. Yeah.
If it, sorry, if I could just step on the
Yeah.
soapbox for a bit, and that's the real danger of AI art and AI tools and relying on them wholly, is that you lose out on experiences like that where one, there's the collaborative aspect between humans, and two, you're like really putting the horse before, or the cart before the horse, right? Where I've seen posts by people like, "Hey, I just made this cover for my book. What do you think?" And he has an AI art cover for his book, but he doesn't even have the fucking story written, and he doesn't
Yeah,
actually know what he out of the thing. As opposed to Darren, where like he's not sure what he wants yet, but the process of creating the thing is where the real beauty of it is,
yeah.
and creating that. And I think you lose that a lot, and people will start losing that a lot if they just rely on these tools that don't allow that kind of interaction.
Last question, and it's the biggest one that I always like to ask for people who have done these things, is if somebody is looking to get into writing, to get into this type of an industry, what would be your best tip for them?
Best tip. Um, could only say what my process was, which was to write your ideas down, show other people, um, iterate feedback until you think it's at a point where it's presentable, then go to cons and show it to people at cons, people that you don't know, and see what they think. And if they like it, well, then you're onto something. Then you start getting a mailing list, right? People will sign up to your mailing list because you're showing it to them. And that's how you can get started. That's how I got started. Yeah,
That's
you just
awesome.
got to show people. And if they like it, they'll sign up. Yeah.
Anything, Kurt?
Good. I guess if people want to write, I encourage them to read. I think your input and your output, you obviously have to write, right? Like, because if you want to be a writer, you can't just read, but your input and your output should constantly be at relatively roughly the same level.
Yeah.
Uh, I read a lot, like we read a lot, we look at things all the time, and that informs our output a lot. And I think both are valuable. So read a ton, be aware of a ton, and then also write stuff. And I guess my second piece of advice is to find a good collaborator because it can be hard to make stuff by yourself sometimes.
Yeah.
And if you get stuck by yourself, some people could just do it. Stephen King or whatever, right? He's like, I'm just gonna I'm gonna do some cocaine and I'm gonna write a book in like 2 weeks. I mean, back in the day. But I didn't really start writing a lot until I met Darren because we kind of have complementary skill sets and ways of thinking. And so if you could find someone like that, that could be really huge for your creative process. So if you have a hard time finishing something by yourself, that's my other piece of advice is to find a good collaborator who you could trust and you guys can make stuff together.
Yeah, I'm going to reiterate what Kurt just said. To write, you must read. To game design, you must game as well.
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
That's awesome.
And to go again, what Kurt said, we're a yin and yang. Like, Kurt's a part of this team originally is because I'm not very good at creative writing. I can make stories, I can make the world, that's all fine. But actually turning it into a story that's fun to read and enjoyable, it's not one of my talents. And it is one of Kurt's. And we're both interested in game design, and that's how we came together. And then I guess that's another lesson as well, is know your strengths and know your weaknesses. Obviously, I can't illustrate. I can't draw. In fact, if you see some of the art books, you'll see some of my sketches in there. And you don't want those in art books, right? But that's why you hire illustrators. They can draw. And so the same thing for lots of other jobs. You have to wear many hats, but sometimes there are hats you can't wear, and you should pass them to other people and know when to delegate and pass things on.
And Darren is very, he has a doctorate in physics, and he's very good with numbers. So I could do game design as well, but if I need to model something and think about the statistics of it, I can try to figure out, but he just has a much better grasp on
the mechanics source portions of it. He can gather where you've got the creative writing.
He's very good at that.
That's awesome. And a great way to finish tonight. This has been a fun conversation in many ways for me because it's not only been about a game that you've created and you have extreme passion about, but it's also about a story and a culture that you're pushing forward. And I think that is really where modern TTRPGs are heading, is we're starting to pull from other cultures and it's starting to blend much more uniquely than we had expected. Any last words from you guys before we close out tonight?
Check out our Kickstarter.
Definitely do that. I'll make sure.
No, just just kind of what you said really is it's fun to branch out and try other games and investigate other games because they're all different stories and different stories come from different places, so you just end up learning so much. So come on, Kurt, you any last thoughts?
Without getting to specifics, I know especially in America it's been a tough few weeks for a lot of people and dealing with the realities of whatever your world and your political realities are. And it could seem like when you're playing games that, this isn't as important. But the reality of it too is we have these stories to deal with these kind of times. And these stories don't come from nowhere. They come from people who go through tribulations and trials and difficult times. And by reading these stories and supporting these stories, sharing these stories to people around you, they give us strength and teach us how to be brave. And that's what I teach my students, who I still teach. That's why I use these stories. That's what I teach to myself. I draw strength from these stories of old heroes and legends to give me strength for today. And I think that's something we all need to do. So keep sharing, keep telling stories, and make your community better, because by making your community better, you have the strength as a people to overcome these kind of things. So that's my end cap.
See, that's why I went first, because I knew that Kurt would go second. You'd do that. Yeah.
Well, Kurt, Darren, thank you for taking the time to come here on the show, hang out with us, tell us about your great new Kickstarter that everybody's going to go check out tonight, and looking forward to see what's next. If you want to check out their stuff, make sure you go over to their Kickstarter, check out adderstonegames.com, as well as check them out on all their social medias. Till then, this is our evening of Tavern Talks. Everybody raise your glasses high. This is last call. We'll see you guys all next week on Tavern
I have guitar
Talks.
polish. I have some guitar polish. This is probably this will get the job done.